Hey everyone, welcome back. I hope you're doing well out there. So today's video is going to be a bit of an exploration of a lot of the kind of common answers that I find myself giving on a variety of different questions and topics about personal healing, personal transformation, our own psychology, understanding our issues, and psychedelics, psychedelic therapy, and kind of a lot of how all of this fits together as I'm currently understanding it. Like I've said in recent videos, I'm kind of going through a bit of a personal renaissance, a personal revolution of understanding where all of this is really clicking at a deeper level for me. And I'm really going through a process right now of trying to refine all of my understandings and boil all of that down into something much more simple and usable for you as an audience. So today's video is kind of in that spirit. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about it. Let me give a little context here, and then we'll go ahead and get into the content here. So for context really quick, I spend a lot of my time online interacting with people around questions around, personal development, personal transformation work, understanding our own issues and kind of psychology, talking a lot about psychedelics, partially as a way to kind of give back and share my knowledge and contribute and try to help people further along their path just because I care. Also, because I want to understand more clearly where people tend to have common questions, common struggles, common confusions, where things may be a little kind of poorly framed in terms of online understanding, and maybe I can kind of contribute or understand more clearly where people struggle to understand how to do this work, what this work looks like, how it feels, yada, yada, right? So I'm always interacting. And because I'm always interacting and looking at people's questions and challenges, and you're going to see patterns. You're going to see the same question come up over and over. And obviously also as part of that, you're going to start to develop your own set of perspectives and opinions and thoughts. And so in this video, what I've done is I've gone ahead and I kind of had like an aha moment where it's like, okay, boom, these are all the things that for anyone who wants to know, who like, how do I understand how I got this issue? How do I deal with the issue? Blah, 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 all the common questions. I kind of had this moment of inspiration and I'm like, boom, let's just put it all down in a document here and kind of rattle off my common responses to help people clearly understand what exactly, is going on, in this territory and how to navigate it, and probably where the leverage is for healing and personal transformation, and kind of, boil it all down to a common set of understandings. So that's what we've got in this video. I'm going to go through this PDF that I made. And if you guys like it, let me know. I'll be happy to make a link for the PDF and offer it to you. Of kind of my talking points here, my thoughts, my perspective on a range of things. And hopefully there will be insight here for you. Hopefully, if you're either maybe new to psychedelics and trying to get a sense of how all this works, or you're you're kind of embarking on your self-healing journey, or maybe you've been at this for a while and there are kind of stuck spots or blind spots, this is really for all of you to hopefully maybe give you a little bit of a different perspective that gives you a little bit of a new opening that helps you to create the transformation that you're after. So without much further ado, let's go ahead and just start diving into the points here. I will do my best in this video to try to create, timed points with the timestamps below afterwards. And for the record, yes, I do have some neighbors working on some stuff, so you might hear an occasional little bit of construction going on in the background. I'll do my best to try to filter it out with the post-production here, but kind of is what it is, unfortunately. So bear with me. Hopefully this is still listenable and usable as a video. So with all that said, let's go ahead and crack into this document, start talking about some of these common points. All right, so here we are. So a couple quick things before we go ahead and start talking about this. First of all, I'm going to try to do my best to go through it a bit more quickly. I realize I do make long videos. I tend to over-explain. I'm still finding that sweet spot between over-driving home my point and under-explaining. I want to make sure that you guys clearly understand things. So I realize I'm a bit verbose. I'm going to try to keep it a little bit to the point here. If you do have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. I would love to see anything that you're not clear about so that I can explain that to you in another video in the future. Let me see what else to know. This document that I've created is a little bit hodgepodge. I fully own that because I'm kind of brainstorming a bunch of different common talking points and trying to put them into something of a cohesive document and structure here. But it is a little all over the place, and it's also a bit, it has a few gaps in it where perhaps there was something that I didn't have a strong common talking point or novel thing to share. So you may feel like some of your questions don't get answered. If that's the case, please again leave them down below in the comment section. Or you may find that you're a little confused. You're like, oh, he's kind of all over the place here. Again, I'm trying to compile a lot of different common responses to kind of illustrate a clearer understanding of this whole territory of how do we use psychedelics for self-healing. So this encompasses just generally understanding how we get issues, what the common issues are, how to deal with the issues, and then bringing that into a psychedelic context. What are some of the things we need to know about that? So enough said, let's dive in. So the first place I want to start here is something that I already mentioned and did a whole other video on recently. So if you haven't seen it, I strongly recommend you go look at the 5 major collective blind spots video. It's very important. So we're kind of going from macro to kind of more personal here as we move through this document. So starting with 5 major collective blind spots. These are things that are very common blind spots in people at large for most of us that if we were aware of, would be revolutionary understandings. But generally speaking, most people don't track these, and these massively affect and shape your healing process and understanding your issue and how to heal it. Okay, so off the top of this document here, the first one is going to be unconscious bids for connection or attachment or co-regulation. So this is grounded in attachment theory. Basically what this means is that we have these moments where we unconsciously, we don't realize we're doing this most of the time, or we're doing it kind of compulsively, reaching out to connection from others in order to feel connected, seen, heard, understood, felt, resonated with, engaged with, so that we don't feel alone with whatever this problem that we're trying to process is. We all do this. We do this across multiple domains and in all kinds of different ways in our lives. This is one of the most common patterns about human beings. And if you start to look around, you'll start to see we're all frequently doing unconscious bids. This can look like complaints, venting, reaching out to covertly get connection by trying to give somebody something or offer something. This can be, being upset about one thing, but then making a problem somewhere else because we can't talk about the thing. This can be asking questions online, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This can be doing things to get attention, et cetera, et cetera. There's all kinds of unconscious ways that we go about trying to get our need for connection met. What's underneath that bid is a desire and a deep nervous system need for connection. The reason that this is important, besides understanding the kind of matrix of relationships around you, is because this also happens internally inside of ourselves between the parts of us that are holding the wounds, the stress, the fear, the problem, and our kind of mature, rational, conscious adult mind, right? So your conscious adult rational mind is often being invited, let's say, by these parts of us that want to heal, want to process, is being invited by these parts by having these parts be brought up. Now, for most of us, this is again a blind spot and we don't realize it. And what happens is that we end up not really tracking that the part of us that has the complaint and the part of us that is centered, grounded, conscious adult attention are not the same aspects of ourselves. We blend the two, we confuse the two, and then we just vent and rationalize it after the fact, or kind of dismiss it as being normal and common. So this is a blind spot I want you to start to become aware of, because this massively impacts your path to healing and impacts and describes in a significant way what's happening in a psychedelic experience when we have these sudden surges of emotions and feelings and memories, like what's going on. It's your deeper system communicating with an unconscious bid for connection to this place inside of yourself. I hope that makes sense. Okay, next one on these points. I'm not going to say as much about each of them. Next one is social hierarchy competition. And I think more broadly, understanding that there's an unconscious implicit hierarchy game being played in society all around us all the time. This kind of, really comes from evolutionary psychology, which is a very unpopular field of psychology inside of psychedelics and psychedelic therapy and psychedelic theory, which I think is very interesting because I think Evo Psych is pretty useful at very least, and very likely self-evident and very true. So part of why we have issues, part of a lot of things like guilt or shame or anxiety, part of why we end up with depression, part of why we have a wounded sense of connection to ourselves, to each other, has to do with a lot of these social hierarchy games, and the kind of status and where we perceive ourselves, or where other people reflect to us our status in the social hierarchy. This is really important to understand for a lot of reasons, but one of which that I want to highlight here is that often it's important to understand that if somebody has an unconscious, they don't realize they're doing it, agenda of wanting to make themselves look higher in the social status hierarchy than you, the feedback they may give you about yourself may not be, let's say, in good faith or trustworthy or clean or accurate. It's very common for people to give negative reflections to other people as a way of trying to maintain their own status above others. Right? So this is important to understand because this damages our sense of self, our sense of connection. But again, if we take all of that as true and accurate and in good faith and take that personally, we can really take on something that becomes a wound for us that may not actually be accurate or the truth. It's really important to understand and start to separate ourselves out from the social hierarchy competition, realize that it's an unconscious game being played. Another example of this is how people avoid you when you have issues and when you have problems in your life because it lowers their perceived status, right? Especially if you're talking publicly about these things. Another example of this is, the way parents will project on their kids to be at a certain place in the status hierarchy because it reflects well on them as parents. Tons of examples of how hierarchy anxiety, hierarchy stress, hierarchy games really get projected onto us, and how that massively shapes how we end up with issues. Also, whether or not our issues are relevant to our actual, who we are as people, and, whether or not we want to consent to, or the hierarchy that's being projected on us is even relevant to who we are and what we want to do in life. So, a lot there. Another one is understanding the possibility to integrate the nervous system. So I'm pulling this from NLP, but there are other schools of kind of transformational work and therapy where this would also apply. But the basic thing here to understand is that, first of all, it would be the inverse of integration, which is fragmentation. A lot of us don't realize that we have, as we develop, as we kind of grow up as a natural adaptive thing, our psyche develops what are called fragmentations or splits, where we basically create parts or subpersonalities that are kind of specialized to help us, feel certain things or do certain things or have certain value sets. So we create these kind of different facets of our personality. And because we're not normally aware of that, we don't realize when we're switching between these different parts of our personality as the dominant thing that we're expressing through how we're behaving in the moment. So because of that, we don't really track how our personality is multifaceted, and how often those different facets of our personality have different needs, different agendas, different perspectives, different points of view that can conflict with each other. Right? So this is part of the reason we stay stuck with issues or struggle or have a lot of, we're torn between, growth or feeling comfortable or, belonging with our family or expanding into a whole other thing and being the only person from our family into a whole new way of life or whatever. Things like this, these common kind of struggles between different aspects of ourself. And so we kind of intuitively know that. We know that we have different sides to our personality kind of intuitively, although we don't really understand how distinct they can be. And we kind of intuitively realize we feel conflicted about things. So we don't realize that that's an internal disagreement or misalignment happening where there's kind of a tug of war between different aspects of ourself going on. The inverse of that is also true. We come to accept that that's kind of how it is to be a human being and don't realize that we can integrate parts and integrate aspects of our psyche and personality into a more cohesive whole that's much higher functioning, that's much more robust, and that's much more fluid and dynamic in how it expresses because all of these parts become available to us as options in a given moment as a whole, right? So this is, again, another major blind spot that people don't realize how kind of clunky and rigid and dysfunctional their personality is. And then they also don't realize that they can actually integrate that and make it much more smooth and fluid and holistic. Another major blind spot here would be what's called secondary gain in therapy, or what you may have heard of in IFS or internal family systems work, if you're familiar with it, which is this idea that there are no bad parts. Very important to understand. Basically, this is a huge blind spot where people think when I have a problem and it's been in my life for a long time, it's because I'm broken. When the reality is, if you get in touch with a part of you that is holding onto the problem and you dialogue with it and you unpack what's going on there and you do so without judgment or without fear, and you really lean into connecting with that aspect of yourself, more often than not, what you're going to find is that underneath the dysfunctional behavior, the depression, the anxiety, the fear, the antisocialness, the what have you, right? The not reaching for what we want in life, the et cetera, right? All the things that we do. What's underneath that, more often than not, I'm going to say 95% of the time, maybe more, is some form of positive intention or positive need or positive orientation that we are not aware of and not tracking. That's unconscious for us. So this is really important to understand because it really transforms the landscape of looking at your issues from a landscape of shame and judgment and fear and disappointment in ourselves to an opportunity to really start to understand the deeper positives that our deeper intelligence maintains in our lives for us automatically. This is a powerful, profound moment of understanding that creates self-connection and creates like a deeper insight into what it is that your system has learned along the way in your life and values, and why that might be important in your life. I can give examples. I'll probably do another thread about another video rather, about IFS and my thoughts about it. I do have a lot of opinions about it. But for now, let's just say you want to know that every issue you have is rooted in some positive intention inside of yourself. And part of the work here is to start to become aware of this. Again, not knowing this makes your healing, makes your growth much harder. This again is a blind spot for most of us. Okay, the last one I want to point out here, which is another huge one, comes from kind of the field of epistemics, which is the study of how we know what we know, how we, the theory of mind, how we think, how we learn. And this is the concept of construct awareness, or not being aware of our constructs. So it essentially goes like this. Every single person lives through, not, so this is our interface between reality and our internal experience, a map, if you want to call it that, of reality, or a set of understandings and assumptions and beliefs and perspectives and opinions and pieces of conditioning all kind of rolled together. That is a construct. It is not the truth. It is not the wholeness of the truth. It may have fragments of truth in it, but we confuse that construct with reality itself. We confuse our map of reality for reality. And when we do that, when we are unaware, when we are ignorant of our own map, and that it is only a map, and that it is only a construct, and that that construct can be refined, made clearer, updated, transformed, thrown out altogether with a whole other understanding, we get stuck. We have problems. We create problems when we start getting into power struggles with other people about a certain topic or a certain thing that we care about or that we think is right or wrong. This is often because we are confusing our map for the truth, our map for reality. So this is, again, another major blind spot, is you'll see that most people are totally unaware of their own map, and that their map is shaping how they feel, and that one of their places of power is to challenge and question and become self-aware of their own map of reality and the assumptions that are embedded inside of it. Very, very important. I'll give one example here. I'll probably do another video about this at some point. My major critique about the New Age and spiritual community, which I do consider myself a part of, spent my whole adult life inside of, quite frankly, one of my major critiques is that the common problem you see in the spiritual community and the New Age community is a lack of construct awareness. They are not aware that their own set of beliefs and perspectives and opinions and views and the set of experiences that they've had, no matter how cosmic, strange, far out, are only a map and not necessarily the whole truth about their experience or about reality itself. This is a major, major issue, a major, major blind spot for a lot of us, and an important place to start to become tuned in. Okay, so again, 5 major collective blind spots. Without these pieces of awareness, the rest of what I'm about to say here becomes much more difficult. These are foundational in the background assumptions. If you're a fish swimming in the ocean, this is the water we swim in a big way, that if you're not aware that you're swimming in water, it makes everything else much more confusing and difficult. So very important. Okay, let's move on. Uh-oh, keyboard not working. Hello, keyboard. Okay, on to the next here. So, and by the way, key points you need to know. I realize that's kind of like a cheesy, a cheesy title for the document. I didn't really know how else to put it. So pardon my kind of bluntness with the title there. So when we're looking at issues, when we're looking at dealing with, whatever our problem is that we want to transform and level up, and, whether it's personal development or some sort of piece of healing, there is this phase we go through where we are trying to describe and understand what it is, which is really a form of self-diagnosis. Now, in this diagnosis phase, there are a few things I want you to understand. Excuse me. First of all, I want you to understand that what you're noticing, whatever it is, the depression, the anxiety, the pattern that you're trying to describe to yourself, is very likely the symptom of the issue and not the real issue itself. This is really important to understand. Mostly what we are able to be conscious of about ourselves is downstream from whatever the real issue is going to be. The real problem is almost always still in the unconscious mind and yet to be connected with. Another thing I want you to know about self-diagnosis is that common psychological diagnostic language is nothing more than a simple description of the symptoms you're experiencing and not necessarily an accurate rendering of the mechanics of your problem. Okay? So when you say, I am depressed, I have anxiety, I have depression, I have whatever it is, OCD or that is a description of symptoms. I hope that's clear. Thinking in terms of these descriptions of your issue can really slow or distort your ability to resolve it. As an example, most of these experiences are actually a process. There's a loop. There's a set of a cascade of experiences that goes through a cycle most of the time, right? But when you describe it as a thing, right? I have the depression, right? It's a thing you have, but it's a thing you have that you can't touch or work with. It distorts the understanding that it's actually a process and that there are things that happen inside of that process that create the effect in the experience of depression in a cyclical loop, right? So it's really important to understand that common psychological diagnostic language is based in this model of pathology, which is based in a medical model, which may not be an accurate, again, going back to maps of understanding and construct awareness here, may not be an accurate way of thinking about a lot of personal healing issues, psychological healing issues, may not be an accurate understanding of our own psyche and mind and psychology. Using a mechanistic, materialistic medical framework for something as abstract as mind and emotions may not work as a fundamental assumption. So I hope that makes sense to you. Another thing to know about self-diagnosis, the real problem will probably have to come out as an emergent understanding as you get your conscious thinking mind out of the way. This is one of the reasons that talk therapy often fails and why psychedelic therapy is so helpful. So this is something that I see over and over as someone who's worked with psychedelics and also who does hypnotherapy. Generally speaking, the pattern of movement is like an unfolding from the unconscious to the conscious, right? An unfolding and emerging of whatever has been in the background and unseen into the light of awareness over and over. So it's this process of emergence where we actually discover the real thing that needs healing, or the real pattern at play, or the real need underneath it all, or what have you, right? And so this is something I want you to understand, because a lot of people think, oh, I know what my problem is. I'm going to use psychological diagnostic language to describe it, and I'm going to try to fix it from a place of self-judgment, self-shame, top down, bringing my brain to it, where the real healing process is a much more unfolding, mysterious, emergent thing, right? And this is true whether you're doing somatic therapy. This is true in the successful forms of transformational talk therapy, things like hypnotherapy, psychedelic therapy. It's all this same pattern across the board of moving from the unconscious to the conscious. And so I want you to know this so that you can come to terms with the fact that you're going to have to engage the unknown and the mysterious, and quite frankly, spoiler alert, that's often much more beautiful and wonderful and magical than you think it's going to be. Most of us are terrified of our own unconscious minds for no good reason. It's really that process, and you really want to embrace that and come to terms with that and be like, okay, I get it. I don't know what my problem is. I'm going to need to work at unpacking that and unfolding that, through a process here, probably with working with someone else, because unless you know how to do it for yourself, it can be confusing. We can get kind of stuck. So anyways, I want you to understand that this pattern, it's like a flower unfolding itself. There's like a core, and there's kind of an emerging that happens out of that. So that's very important to understand. Okay, so let's talk about where we are commonly sick in society, okay? It is really come to my attention. I've always known this kind of intuitively, and it's a idea I've come around to over and over. But as I'm relearning more about trauma therapy and how to support people and get more trauma informed myself and work with trauma, and as I'm learning more and more about all this stuff, it's come really clear to me that where we are sick, what's going to heal us is some form of connection, okay? Where we are sick in society most often is some form of disconnection in our lives, okay? And I want to highlight and separate out, and I'll do another video on this probably too, connection and disconnection from things that we commonly associate it with, like romantic relationships, or having one person in your life that is your one person to rely on, or connection with the one place where you feel like you need it, et cetera, et cetera. Disconnection can show up, like mostly, and I think that the primary place where we feel disconnected that creates a lot of the issues we see in our society is disconnection from ourselves. Also, disconnection from safe relationships with other people, non-judgmental, welcoming, secure, comfortable, affirming. We feel seen, we feel related to, respected, connected to, patiently, engaged with, where we have room to be ourselves. Types of relationships. These are all too rare in our society. They are all too rare in our way of life, especially online with all the kind of like banner and all the kind of like shaming and judging and trolling culture. It really poisons our ability to feel safe connection and safe relationships, but also in our personal lives, whether it's with our family or, our friends. A lot of times we don't have the safe connection that we actually really want. We're kind of starving for it. This is so common. It's so sad. And so this is a huge place where we are undernourished that really contributes to a lot of our issues. Another huge one is disconnection from a clear sense of possibility for ourselves. In this time in the world, there's a lot of transformation and a lot of uncertainty and a lot of change and a lot of ambiguity about the future. And, are we, going to end up in some sort of a dystopian nightmare of one form or another? Are we going to end up in some economic meltdown? Are we going to end up in an environmental meltdown, et cetera, political meltdown? And also, cost of living is skyrocketing. People are making less money, for young people. There's so much there that's creating a sense of disconnection from a clear sense of possibility towards what we want. And this disconnection from possibility, disconnection from a clear line of achievement, or even disconnection from ourselves enough to be clear about what we want in the first place, really are huge places where people are commonly suffering and struggling. That creates a lot of the issues downstream that we end up seeing as the mental health crisis or a need for dramatic therapies like psychedelic therapy. Another huge thing where we are commonly sick in society is bad, low quality, distorted, shitty thinking. I got to keep it real on this. I'll be talking about this more further on in the video here. But point being, if we resolve these issues of connection and bad thinking, that will go a very long way towards our well-being. I realize a lot of you probably have tried CBT and it didn't work for you and you don't think highly of it. And so you might have a little bit of a chip on your shoulder when it comes to therapies that involve refining the way you think, because that probably hasn't translated into real change in your life. But so this is the place where I overlap with CBT, excuse me. But I'm not really an advocate for CBT, and that's not what I do with people. But the place where I overlap is that I do agree that there are a lot of distortions in thinking and low skillfulness in thinking that massively contributes to our issues. It makes things much worse than they need to be. And that's interpersonally between us, in the way we communicate and relate with each other. Again, connection being primary, but also internally inside of ourselves and the way we conceive of our issues. This, I think what CBT gets right is that these distortions in thought do make things worse. And if we can clean those up, it does help. It's not always what's going to create a transformational experience, but it's important. So the bottom line here I want you to get is that all healing is going to involve some form of connection. Okay, this is super important. Disconnection is part of the wound, and connection is what heals almost all of the time. Okay, so I know that sounds a little woo-woo. I know that sounds a little new age. And also this is something you hear a lot from, different psychonauts. But I think there's a deep truth in it once you start getting into the practice of doing, transformational work with people. It's so clear that this is often where we're, and particularly connection with ourselves, with our bodies, with our nervous system, and self-regulation. Okay, moving on. So how you got here. So here's how you ended up having the issue in the first place, okay? Generally speaking, what I want you to know is that the reason problems stay stuck for us is because of some flavor of avoidance. Now, this is kind of funny because avoidance is also part of how animals in nature often deal with threat and danger, right? So it's part of our wiring to avoid uncomfortable, stressful, upsetting things. And that might include memories. That might include things we haven't figured out, problems that we haven't sorted through, etc. But some flavor of avoidance is really what's keeping the issue stuck in place and not healing and not being put, correctly into the past where it probably really belongs. The way to healing and transformation is going to be in one of two directions. I want you to understand this as well. And generally out of avoidance. We can either lead ourselves toward engaging the problem, the pain, the fear, the stress more directly and processing it. This is how most therapy is really organized, again, with that pathology model of what is the problem. Let's lean into the problem and process and resource you and move through it. This is especially true in a lot of trauma work. It's really like, okay, what's present in the nervous system that the nervous system wants to let go of? Let's start to work with that rather than suppress it and process it through. This works. It can be really challenging work, though. It can be really painful work. It can be really hard work, really sad work, really slow work sometimes. But one way out of having the problem is going to be towards engaging the problem. The other way we can go, though, the other way out is towards accessing powerful positive resource states and then bringing those to the problem as agents of transformation. So kind of moving into your blissful, ecstatic, positive, safe, comfortable nervous system, really deeply resonating with feeling really, really good, feeling really safe, feeling really, playful, feeling really happy, feeling really full of well-being or really peaceful or what have you, whatever the research state might be for you. And once you're in that state, there are ways we can connect that back into whatever the problem is that essentially starts to unwire the problem in our nervous system. So this is the other way we can go, is towards the positive first and then bring that to bear on the problem. I think for a lot of people, this is really a better way to go, but not always. And I think ultimately it depends on what your nervous system, the direction it wants to go. But generally speaking, I want you to know, again, it's out of avoidance and towards either engaging the problem or towards a research state. Most people are under-resourced and deficient in general in their ability to access powerful resource states, right? Most people are better at feeling bad than feeling good, to put it really simply. Most people are really, can drop into depression and sadness and complaints and frustration and fear like that, right? Most people have a much slower, harder time remembering what it feels like to feel peaceful, blissful, free, full of, creativity and wonder and passion and drive and all of these wonderful qualities, right? So obviously, if we're not good at feeling those feelings, maybe that's where the practice and where the work could go first. Likewise, like I just said, most people are overdeveloped in their ability to access negative thoughts and feelings. Okay, so let's get a basic understanding of the big picture here. So again, what is probably going to heal you is some form of connection. I'm going to be saying this a lot on the channel, so get comfy with hearing that, okay? That might be some form of connection to others. That might be connection to life as a whole, right? Maybe you feel disconnected from life. That might be connection to yourself or to some part of yourself, right? That might be connection to the spiritual in life or in yourself. That might be, again, connected to repressed pain, fear, stress, shame, all that kind of thing, whatever the thing is that you're kind of holding on to that, again, you've been avoiding. That might be connection to repressed joy, pleasure, bliss, and a desire to really be vibrantly alive. Again, this is another thing we often repress with avoidance. Connection to a younger part of yourself, etc., etc. Some form of connection is going to be what it is that heals you. So I want you to know psychedelics heal us in a couple different ways from my perspective. One is by helping us connect to what needs connecting to. And sometimes, again, in a psychedelic session, this can come up as a sudden, expression of a body experience of a negative emotion or state. Might all of a sudden you get a lot of fear coming through, or a lot of overwhelm, or a lot of sadness, or a lot of grief, or what have you. The other way that this often comes up is a psychedelic. Sometimes we want to process the heavy, dark stuff, and instead what it gives us is ecstasy, joy, hope, optimism. That's also something that may need connecting to inside yourself. The other way that psychedelics can heal us is they can help us by opening up our brain to being rewired, opening up that window of neuroplasticity to help us re-imprint patterns in our nervous system that don't work for us any longer, right? So, for example, you have some sort of a PTSD response, and there's a kind of a thought-emotion loop that's all tied in together there. If you do psychedelic therapy properly, you can re-imprint that, so that imprint is all the charges taken out of it, all the intensity is taken out of it, and it just becomes a memory that gets filed away into the past that no longer has this strong imprint that's like looping over and over. So those are the two ways in general I think that psychedelics heal us. Generally speaking, understanding attachment theory, and in particular what secure attachment is and looks like, is going to be of very great importance with self-healing. So this is really a major thing. We have to relate to our nervous system in a secure way, both on the medicine and in daily life. There is an element of self-relationship here that is central to the issue of healing. So, first of all, it's important for you to understand what secure attachment is and looks like, right? And I will be doing videos about this and talking about it. It's really central. But how this shows up a lot of times when I'm working with people, whether I'm talking online with people or whether it's someone that I'm working with as a client, the number one issue that's in the way for people healing, the first thing and the most common thing, is some form of self-judgment about having the problem, about the thing that happened in the past, about, and that self-judgment you could call shame or guilt. I don't really like those terms, and how therapists kind of overemphasize shame and guilt, and shame and guilt. I think it actually is counterproductive sometimes to really highlight that too much. What there is some form of self-judgment, and self-judgment is not relating to ourselves through the lens of secure self-attachment, right? So if you think about it, if you had a parental figure that was judging you, that's not secure attachment. That creates anxiety and stress about whether or not you're safe, and whether or not you belong, and whether or not this person's going to abandon you, or whether or not this person's going to explode on you, these kinds of things. And that same dynamic applied to ourselves creates that same polarization and disconnect and stress, right? So the first thing we need to do, generally speaking, for a lot of us, before we can really heal, is start to relate to the parts of us that are communicating and expressing through this lens of unconditional, curious, kind, sweet, attentive presence, right? So I'm listening, I care, I'm curious. Oh, that's what you're experiencing, not trying to tell ourselves that we're not feeling that. Oh, that's what's going on here. Thank you for telling me. I'm not going to abandon you while you feel bad. I'm not going to force you to heal before you're ready, or push you into a situation where you have no say in the matter. That's kind of how a good parent works, and that's kind of what we need with ourselves. This is fundamentally like one of the major keys to unlocking your healing that I just see over and over. A lot of people think of secure attachment as this thing that you get at the end of your attachment work, and that is the fruit of healing. But I'm going to offer you the idea here that secure attachment is actually the prerequisite way that you have to relate to yourself in order to heal. I hope that makes sense. Generally, the medicine will dramatically increase your ability for, this is another thing, basic understanding, big picture here, that I want you to know, is the medicine increases our ability for interoception. So this is kind of a jargony word. But that basically means the ability to be aware of what's happening internally inside your body. So this is emotions, this is thoughts, this is mental pictures, this is self-talk, this is memories, this is body sensations, becoming aware of all of these patterns of internal experience. Obviously, the medicine is an amplifier that makes you more sensitive to these things. And, literally you can see, shapes, colors, pictures, geometry, memories, layers of meaning, on the medicine. So this is another way that psychedelics help us to heal, is that they help us to develop interoception. They put us more in touch with the nuance and the subtlety of our internal landscape. And that's huge for, having more of an ability to understand the different moving parts, so to speak, of our healing process here. Okay, so let's talk a bit about interacting with medicine and what that looks like, and some of the things that I feel like, again, people need to know about interacting with medicine. So first thing, I kind of just spoiled this a moment ago. Understand that first and foremost, psychedelics are drugs of awareness and drugs of sensitivity. I think this gets overlooked a lot. People don't really grasp that psychedelics make you much more aware externally and internally, much more sensitive externally and internally, and also, much more suggestible when you're on the medicine, right? So part of that sensitivity is also not just trait openness becomes more, of a thing, but you literally become much more suggestible and vulnerable to conditioning, to ideas, to inputs, to messaging in general. And it's really easy for our brain, our unconscious mind, to kind of latch onto some of these messages and really deeply absorb them. So we have to be very, very picky. They generally make you more aware of everything, both good and bad. Remember, again, that avoidance is how you arrived at the issue you're looking to resolve. So part of why psychedelics heal, from my perspective, is that they make you more aware and more sensitive, and avoidance becomes harder. And that's a good thing in the bigger picture. Sometimes in the short term, obviously, we all know that can create these challenging journeys that are really difficult and uncomfortable. In the bigger picture, though, that same quality of sensitivity and awareness helps us to start to not be in avoidance so much. The dynamic, again, that we're working with here is emergence. I want you to understand that the medicine is helping you to unfold yourself, to open the way a flower opens. And so this is the rhythm, and psychedelics really kind of amplify that as well. All discoveries will happen inside of this emergent process. We have to be willing to embrace this movement from unconscious mind to conscious mind as the way that this process works. I know I already said that, but just kind of reiterating that here. It's funny, with these presentations, I have a nasty habit of getting ahead of myself and saying things earlier on than where it's at. So anyways, let me see. The basic mindset, and this is another thing I really want you to get for a session, is a combination of curiosity, openness, and love towards everything you encounter inside of yourself. The way I often tell this to clients is that this is the most protective mindset. This is the thing that is most likely to help you have a good experience, a positive journey, an insightful journey, a journey that's filled with beauty and moments of profundity and goodness, and not get overloaded into some sort of really difficult anxiety response. Generally, the reason that we end up, in those kinds of difficult experiences is because we are not in this mindset of love and openness and curiosity. If we stay in that mindful kind of open, love, curiosity kind of space, it generally, no matter what we encounter, whether it's a demon or a difficult memory or something someone said or what have you, generally, if we're in that mindset, we will be much more internally protected and much more empowered to engage it and process it. And the other thing I want you to know here that I've never heard anyone else say in the psychedelic space, and it's so obvious to me, is how you relate to what you experience on the medicine is more important than what you experience, right? So there are a lot of people who, especially when you're newer to psychedelics, look at psychedelics and the visions and the experiences and the insights, and it's all about the content of your experience. It's all about, what does this mean, and what did I see, and who are these entities, and all that kind of stuff, right? We get wowed by the razzle dazzle of the display of shapes and colors and meanings and epiphanies and all that. What I'm saying here is all of that is secondary, not primary. And what is primary is how you relate to all of that, right? So this is where you really learn how to relate to whatever it is you experience skillfully. And that's really what determines how healing and powerful and profound a journey is. It's all in the way you relate to what you experience, not what you experience in and of itself. Okay, a couple more things here. So the two most important questions you can ask during a session in my book are, how do I meet this with love? And what needs connecting to? Right? These two questions really interlink and work together synergistically. So whatever you're doing as you're moving through your medicine experience, how do I meet this with love? And what needs connecting to? And again, that might be a big wave of sadness inside of yourself, or overwhelm. That might be, seeing a dark truth about the world we live in and the way human beings are relating to the rest of the planet in terms of ecosystem and all that. This could be, about, some piece of relationship for you and someone in your life. This could be about, et cetera, some strange vision you're having. How do I meet this with love, and what needs connecting to? These are really the two questions that point you towards revelation and breakthrough and insight, and point you towards skillful well-being. And when we abandon these, in other words, I don't want to meet something with love, or I'm not willing to connect with that, that's generally where, again, things go sideways. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the post-medicine phase here. Getting excited, got ahead of myself. So we're going to talk post-medicine here, and then we'll go ahead and wrap the video up. So in general, after the medicine journey, right? So we're talking, what we do after we've come down. We want to be doing grounding, meaning making, and integration. And the thing I really want you to understand from my perspective is these three things are not the same process. I think that that integration is really important, and it's really important to distinguish from grounding and meaning making. And I think that the talking heads in the psychedelic therapy world who are lumping all of these together as integration are doing us a disservice by blending them all, because they are not the same thing. They do not create the same effects. They do not meet the same needs inside of us. And I don't think that that it's useful to confuse or conflate these, right? So I want you to understand meaning making, integration, and grounding, three separate things. In general, I want you to understand that lessons from a journey can continue to impact themselves over months and years, right? So just because you're in this post-journey phase, I don't want you to put undue pressure on yourself to totally try to integrate all the learnings and meanings and all the things in the first few days after a trip. To me, integration is about starting to wire up the key insights, the key experiences. Sometimes they're not insights, but they're more like feelings or moments that are really key, that are clearly in some way beneficial, obviously a personal breakthrough at some level, back into your daily life, back into your default working nervous system. That's integration. That we can do, over the course of a couple sessions after a journey, 2-3 sessions after a journey. That to me is not the same thing, again, as meaning making or grounding, which both might need to happen also. But over time, you may get more understandings about a moment or an insight or an experience. And that's just the nature of a really information-rich experience, right? So a lot of times the types of experiences we have in psychedelics are so multi-layered in meaning, so multi-layered in implications or in use in our life, that there's no way we can integrate and understand and really come to terms with all of that immediately. And I don't think we're meant to. I think we're meant to have that unpack over time and really weave itself through our lives in all kinds of different ways. In general, I also want you to know that if you had a big experience that left you stirred up after the journey, that's often where it's time to seek a therapist to get additional support. This is really important to understand. A lot of times people, go in, they're ready, maybe they make the mistake of taking too much. They have this big experience and it's really like way more than they have the education and the nervous system skills to be able to contain and work with. Don't just ignore that. Don't just be like, oh God, that was a lot. I don't know what to do with that. And then just kind of go on with your daily life. Don't just, be like, oh, whatever, those are the moments you really should go work with someone who can help you, ground what needs grounding, understand and make meaning around what needs meaning making, and also help you integrate whatever big positives or usefuls have come out of that experience. Okay, in terms of physical post-session stuff, this is kind of post and during session. Again, it's hard to cleanly separate all this information out here. The medicine will often amplify somatic expressions of communications from the deeper psyche. I've said this a couple times in this video already, so I'm sure you get what I'm saying here. This can show us exactly where we need to put our attention and connection to heal. And this can also teach us where we might need to work more after the medicine session. So sometimes, you have a communication, an unconscious emergent communication from a part of yourself that is presenting a bid for connection on the medicine. And it's like an opening or an invitation to connect with a whole part of yourself that maybe you didn't even realize was there, didn't realize was holding on to everything that's there. And maybe that's more than you can really fully work with in one session. Maybe that's going to require, some therapy. So like months, or years even. Maybe this is a cue to something that really needs a lot of tending to and care and time and attention. And so sometimes these things come up just to let you know, hey, I'm here. This is work to do. This is where the work is. Also, we want to learn in general, if we're talking about the physical, again, how to become secure relationally and how to speak nervous system. So what do I mean about speak nervous system? It's really about understanding attachment, understanding self-regulation, understanding how to send safety signals to others and to yourself. Super, super important. One of the major pieces of healing is becoming more embodied, right? So this is another thing. A lot of us come to psychedelics and maybe our trauma patterning is that we're all up in our head and we're avoidant of the physical. Maybe we were shamed for our bodies, or maybe we or are frightened of physicality for whatever reason. Maybe we are just very intellectual and love to think and see and understand and know. And there's a source of kind of reward and pleasure and enjoyment in that. But a lot of times where the healing is, from a physical perspective, is learning how to become more embodied, more tuned in to our body, to our senses, to the different layers of our body's experience. And this is part and parcel with healing. If you're not really all that embodied, then this implies a disconnect from yourself, right? So this is part of the rhythm of healing. Is not only is there this emergence from unconscious to conscious, but from like maybe mental or intellectual or conceptual down into experiential and physical. Often healing is about releasing accumulated stress in the nervous system that has been internalized into body memory and it has had no place to go. So as I'm learning more about trauma work, basically what I started to discover is that yes, there's often, acute instances that we've had or clear dysfunctional patterns or people in our early upbringing that, created clear wounds. That definitely happens. That's definitely a thing. And that's a good chunk of it. But the much larger chunk for a lot of us of trauma healing is just stress that we grew up inside of, whether that was two parents who, were arguing with each other, or, stress about money in the household and we kind of environmentally felt it. Our moms were struggling at being new mothers and stressed out all the time, and that imprints us. Our fathers were emotionally disconnected and that imprints us, et cetera, et cetera. These kind of stress, ambient stress around us gets imprinted when we're young and wide open. And so a lot of times, a lot of trauma healing is about letting that stress emerge out of the body. And this is where I'm sure you've probably heard of or seen like tremoring and shaking as an expression of that. You don't have to tremor or shake in order to release stress out of the nervous system, but that is one way it can show up. The thing I want you to get here is that often the healing is about releasing accumulated stress. And this can be why sometimes there is no memory. There is no clear thing. There is, it's my parents were great, or I grew up in a safe enough situation and I don't understand, why I have a trauma response in me because I wasn't physically abused, I wasn't sexually abused, et cetera, et cetera. But if there was a lot of stress for you, for whatever reason, that would be enough to create a traumatic imprint that gets stored in the nervous system. And this is, from certain teachers in the somatic therapy world, I think Peter Levine says this is kind of the iceberg under the water. This is the majority of trauma work. So another food for thought that I want you to know, because a lot of us, we're trying to figure out, how did I get this way? What's my problem? Why am I having this trauma response? And we're kind of afraid to offload the stress that's in there, but that's might be exactly what we need. Okay, in terms of mental, so the medicine is often going to deliver you experiences that are going to be really far outside your normal vantage point of your sense of self or sense of what life is. And often where we have problems afterwards, if we're talking, meaning making or understanding, is the quality of thinking that we do about those experiences. So often the way we think about the things we saw in our journey is a place where things go wrong for us and where we can screw ourselves up. So you want to check yourself for rationalizations. You had some experience that was strange and mysterious, and you make a rationalization about yourself or about people or about life or about the world. You want to watch out for generalizations. This is a huge one, very, very common. You want to watch out for confirmation bias, which is where you are seeking to prove your own theory correct rather than check and challenge your own theories, right? So these are all, again, talking about low quality, crappy thinking. These are all common things we do in terms of bad thinking that really mess us up. And this becomes a way we can amplify and distort misunderstanding a psychedelic experience. Mixing what's called logical levels or levels of abstraction. So we get confused about, identity being here, and we think that that's all we are, but we have this experience that's far outside of identity and far outside of our sense of ego. And then we get confused about the two. And does this mean my ego is boundless, or does this mean that the boundless doesn't exist because all I've known is my ego? We get confused about these different levels of abstraction. And equate them to being all on the same level. And this creates a lot of problems. I'll probably do a video about that at some point because it's pretty important. Abstractions and equivalences. So we will often abstract out a meaning or an experience out into, again, a generalization, or we might equate two things, blah, blah, blah is blah, 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 or blah, blah means blah, blah, blah. These kinds of things. Again, that can really screw you up if you're jumping to these kinds of conclusions. Being overly reductionistic, everything I experienced was just, mental phenomena caused by neurochemicals, and none of it means anything. That can be a way to dismiss being, challenged philosophically or intellectually or emotionally or ontologically, meaning at a being level, we have an experience that's outside of our framework of our understanding. Instead of grappling with the fact that we're challenged, if we are being overly reductionistic, that's an easy way to dismiss something as not real, not valid, not worth exploring. Another example here is emotional thinking masquerading as clarity. A lot of times we will come to these conclusions that are really coming from our emotions. and from our fears or our needs or our desires. But we pretend like it's an insight, it's a clear understanding. And then we want to go act on that rather than understanding like, oh, I'm thinking emotionally here. This isn't clarity yet. Another one would be reverting to what we already know rather than being with the mystery. A lot of times we get confronted with something, again, that's so far outside our map of reality, our construct, that it's uncomfortable, right? And it's a skill to learn how to sit with something outside of our map of understanding and let it be there and let it be mysterious and unknown and confusing. And a lot of times what we try to do is go with what we already know and try to just dismiss and ignore that, which again can be similar to reductionism, a way to really kind of mess ourselves up because we're not really engaging what we experienced. Similarly, discomfort with ambiguity would be another form of that, another flavor of that. Trying to force a resolution to meaning making rather than remaining in open inquiry. This is another flavor of that same thing where we're confronted with mystery, and instead of being like, wow, this is, I don't know what I think, or maybe I need to learn a new set of ideas in order to start to work with this experience I had, instead of being there and being in this open, like holding it loosely kind of place, we try to force an understanding. Well, God, it's uncomfortable for me to not know. So I'm going to make up my mind about that and move forward. I see this a lot for people who are really insecure. And this is a big mistake. You don't want to do that. You don't want to force resolution. You don't want to force clarity. You want clarity to emerge. Clarity is an emergent phenomenon here. And often the way to do that is just to sit with the questions and be in open inquiry. Another example here is forcing a larger experience into a smaller model of reality that doesn't fit. So along the lines of logical levels or abstractions, oftentimes, again, we have this bigger, more holistic experience that encompasses the spiritual and the intellectual and understandings of time and space and our bodies. And it's this really huge, big, complex understanding that we're starting to grasp or perceive about something. And then we want to try to, again, reduce that into a simpler, purely materialistic, mechanistic, physical understanding of things, where a model that includes a lot of subjective content and intuitive content may not really cleanly fit inside of a smaller model. So your larger experience may incorporate materialism and mechanistic understandings and scientific rationalistic understandings, but might transcend that. But to try to squeeze that back down into a purely rational understanding is really doing yourself a disservice and distorting the actuality of what you experienced. Another one that's super common is judging. Whether it's judging yourself, judging others, judging life, blah, 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 blah. These are all ways that we can really screw ourselves up on a mental level that are common post-journey. So as you're sorting through what happened, what it meant to you, don't do these things. Try to catch yourself rationalizing or generalizing or feeding in your confirmation bias or places where you're uncomfortable with ambiguity, etc. Try to track all that and become self-aware of it. And don't feed into it, but instead allow your mind to remain open, supple, receptive, curious, engaged, and learn and explore. That's really where mental growth and meaning making expands into a next level for you. It's important to realize that intellectual understanding alone will not heal and transform you. This is another thing I say all the time. It's a common misunderstanding about therapy and healing that when I understand my problem, then it will be gone. When I understand why I have the issue or what happened, then it will no longer impact me. And in my experience, that's really not true. So it's important to realize that intellectual understanding alone will not heal or transform your problem. It doesn't matter how deep the insight you had on the medicine was. Insight alone isn't transformational most of the time. There are exceptions. There are different ways that this can be turned into a transformation, but often not. It can feel transformational, but that doesn't mean it is. What is required is neural activation and neural reconnection of the experience you had in a way that is intentional and healing to whatever the issue you're working on is, right? So a lot of times when we have this insight about what our problem is, it's kind of transports us into this kind of resource state and this sense of like control and mastery over whatever the problem was. But actually, a lot of times we're in a whole other set of neural paths than when we're really in the thick of having the issue. And so a lot of times what I found is that, when we're on psychedelics, we get these aha moments, but the state we're in doesn't connect back to where we need it. And it's the connecting of the resource again, back to the problem that creates transformation. Just being in a resource, an aha moment, a sense of relief, a sense of insight alone isn't necessarily going to rewire the problem neurology, if that makes sense. So there's skill here. There's a way to do this that creates the change. And it's not just knowing that creates change. Let me see. Was there anything else? So spiritual talking points here. So one thing I want you to understand kind of along that similar line is peak spiritual experiences such as oneness, bliss, ecstasy, joy, etc. become powerful resource states that you can use if you reconnect it back to the problem as fuel for for personal transformation post journey. So I want you to understand these are useful. There are a lot of psychedelic therapists out there who will say that if you have a bliss experience or a oneness experience or a moment of deep well-being, that's not necessarily, that's a distraction from doing the healing work, and that's not useful. I think that's bullshit. I think that they just don't know how to connect the dots back. And if they did, and if they understood the science behind it, they'd probably not be saying that anymore. Spiritual experiences, no matter how deep or profound, if not integrated and not connected back, will generally fade and not lead to lasting transformation. This I can say from my own personal experience to be very true. I've gone deep into ego death. I had my first ego death when I was 17. I've gone deep into ecstatic unitive non-dual practices, non-dual, Hindu practices, non-dual Buddhist practices. I've had profound spiritual healings and awakenings from psychedelics, but did not know how to integrate them at that time, did not know how to rewire those back into my system. And so generally speaking, I'd fall back into my trauma patterns when I came down within a couple of days after the medicine kind of, tapered off. So, spiritual experiences, and you'll see this in spiritual communities. If you spend time in spiritual communities, you'll see people still have their trauma issues. They still have their trauma patterning, and they're trying to use spirituality to escape their trauma patterning. And it doesn't work. And I think, this is, maybe I'll get flack for this, maybe I'll get disagreement, but this is what I've seen over and over and over in different sanghas and communities and practice, communities. It's not enough to bliss out and access these ecstatic transcendent states. As wonderful and as important as they are, they will not necessarily rewire your trauma just because you go there. Often, only using spiritual approaches to mental healing by themselves are not the right tool for the job, in my personal opinion, and can even be damaging or make things worse. So a lot of times what happens for people who are using spirituality to try to address trauma is that it's the wrong tool for the job. They are not getting in the right places that they need to actually heal and transform it. And what ends up happening is feeling kind of demotivated, feeling like it's not working and you don't know why, and you're kind of scratching your head and you're frustrated and lost and confused about it, feeling disappointed in your spiritual practices because they're supposed to, relieve you of all your suffering, and yet they're not, feeling like you're a failure, feeling like you're not doing something right, feeling et cetera, right? So there's a lot of subtle dissatisfaction with your spiritual life or with yourself, or hopelessness, or even like a fear that you're broken and unhealable or unchangeable, that can start to creep in when you're using the spiritual for, trauma work or deep issue work, these patterns that are much more in the animal self, in the body. And again, this is a lack of know-how And I do think spirituality properly applied and connected can be a great source of resource states and be a powerful tool. But more often than not, just the spiritual practices don't do it. There are probably teachers who do know how to do this. Perhaps there are schools of spirituality that offer, much more clarity about this than anything I've seen. But I've gone pretty deep into most of the esoteric practices. And that's my experience, is that, and not only with myself, with all the people I know who are spiritual practitioners who use psychedelics or are psychedelic, psychonauts who are using just spiritual bliss experiences to try to heal themselves. I see the same pattern over and over, which is that the transcendent doesn't necessarily equate to a repatterning of the kind of the more physical, gritty stuff. It can, but it's all in how you apply it. Let me see. Anything else I want to say about this? That looks like the end of the presentation here. We'll go ahead and just summarize this really quick, and then we'll call it a video. Okay, so there you have it. What do you think of all that? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Is there something you've learned here? Something useful? Hopefully so. Again, these are all the kind of common perspectives that I find myself giving to people over and over and over, where people tend to get stuck or confused or are struggling. So hopefully I start to clarify the landscape, both of how we get kind of issues and work with ourselves in general. And then more specifically, when it comes to working with psychedelics, what are some of the key things we really need to know to really get the most out of it? So I'm going to wrap it here because this is already an insanely long video. Again, there will be timestamps down below so that you can watch the whole thing at your own leisure in little chunks, whatever works for you. I hope it's valuable to you. Much love to you all. If you watch this whole thing, thank you for your time and your attention, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Take care.